Very good evening, everyone. Myself, Manish Arora, faculty member, Department of Applied Art, Faculty of Visual Art, Banaras Hindu University. As you already aware about that, this is a fundamental of social design 3 month short-term certificate course come workshop running in association with Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, Baltimore, USA, and Michigan State University, Michigan State, USA. With us right now, again, ma'am, very welcome, Dr. Ajanta Sen from Nanyang University, Singapore, and Industrial Design Center, IIT Mumbai, IIT Bombay, Mumbai. Today we are coming on the new module. It's sustainable for social design. And under this, ma'am is covering to the first part, the principle, and second part on Saturday, the strategies. So now I am handing over the platform to the ma'am and requesting ma'am and welcome again and requesting you to please take over the chat. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Manish, as always. And I welcome the audience to today's module, which is on sustainability, which is a word that is so overused, like social design, that it makes it difficult for anyone who's serious about sustainability to actually try and lay out the depths of what sustainability is in actual practice and not just the buzzwords and the trendy words. So I have divided the module into two parts. One is the principles upon which sustainability ought to be based. And I have shown principles from two parts of the world as I have been doing. And after which on Saturday, I will move on to strategies. Now, the important thing here is that principles do not change. Principles generate values within a given society based on which strategies are done. And strategies can change from time to time depending on availability of technology, obsolescence of technology, or change of situation. For example, there could be a calamity and then something else may be needed. So strategies are based on principles, and principles are based on value systems which would have evolved over a very long period of time. So therefore, what I speak today is of seminal importance, of great importance, so that your ground for understanding strategy and for devising and practicing sustainability through strategic decision becomes clear. So I start with saying that good sustainable practices need to be based on a firm set of principles, which is true for anything, whether you're practicing science, whether you're practicing architecture, you're practicing military training. They are all dependent on the kind of principles that you've been able to evolve. And I take off from our life-centric and human-centric sessions that we had held prior to the social design module, where we arrived at an integrative approach, where we looked at human-centric, which is basically the idea of protecting humans from being dominated by technology, and life-centric, which is protecting nature from being dominated by man. So human-centric and life-centric approaches basically go back into human-centric derived from the sociosphere, life-centric derived from biosphere and geosphere. If you remember the triangle that I'd shown you, where the base is geosphere, followed by biosphere and followed by sociosphere. And the health of the planet is then integratively interconnected across the three parts of the triangle, which will be best served by human-centric and life-centric approaches to design, which then go to decide how well social design domains are created by us. So we come to, so with that in place, I would like to say that although principles of sustainability are universal, they, having devised them, they become contextually translated through cultural idioms so that they become highly relevant for the given set of cultures. So you could have a set of cultures, for example, the Indian culture, Indonesian culture, a lot of the East European culture, African culture, South American culture are all based on culturally mediated sustainability, where the principles have been translated into cultural forms. And you will have got very familiar with this by now. One of the key elements of that translation into cultural form is where we consider the elements of the geosphere, which is rivers, mountains, etc., lakes, etc., and the elements of biosphere to be centric, which to be sentient. And sentient means alive, something which has life. So we can go up to that. So these cultures consider all those two spheres that preceded the social sphere as sentient and alive and not lifeless. Why? Because all those things that I just mentioned, which is mountains, rivers, lakes, etc., from the geosphere, and plants, seeds, forests, etc., and various forms of animals from the biosphere are all life giving, and they carry life giving properties for us, and therefore they need to be respected and cared for. So uh, this is where, with this principle in practice, is where our these set of cultures diverge, separated from the machine cultures, as you may well be aware of. But also, before I come to that, I would like to, and so by taking the principle of sentience, that is, things that are considered to be lifeless in the machine-centric economies, but considered to having life in culturally mediated societies. By taking that as a major principle of sustainability, we tell ourselves that the idea of sentient actually goes back to science, and it is generated from scientific reality, which arise from evolutionary biology, chemistry, and the information sciences. And what do these sciences tell us? Three things, actually four things. First, that humans are not the only ones to process information. On the contrary, we have inherited this ability to process information from nature, and from our earlier ancestral species, and it remains, and therefore it has actually got into our DNA. So this will be the first basis of forming our sustainability principles. So that at the DNA level, because at the DNA level construction, once you know that we have inherited information processing from our earlier species, we also know automatically that our use of sensories has also been inherited from those species. And therefore, and the important thing is that sensories give us a very, very important agency, which is give humans a very important agency, which is the agency to communicate. And the agency of to communicate is so important because it helps us navigate through our everyday life and make it easier, whether to make it pleasant, pleasurable, or whether to help us evade danger. We need sensories to navigate through our everyday life. So the first point is that our information processing comes from our earlier species, and through that, we what entered into our DNA was a set of sensories which now allow us to help us to communicate, which is also true of our animal species. These are all affinities that we continue to share with the biosphere. The third point here is that while we shared these affinities with the biosphere, at some point in time, which is during the cognitive revolution, we separated from the biosphere in one regard at least, which is our ability to be cognate, which means to be aware of two sets of principles. One is morals, that means be able to differentiate between right and wrong, and ethics, differentiate between good and bad. So, in the animal world, a tiger will pounce on a deer because it is hungry. It will only eat to the point that it wants. It will not take the deer, hoard it, and try to eat it some other time. Humans do that. Okay, so we separated from the animal world in these regards, where we no longer carried some of the more equitable properties that the animal world has. So our idea of hoarding, although came under difficult circumstances because you didn't always have food, but in modern times when you have a lot of food and you still hoard, it means that our idea of need has transcended to become greed. Okay, so we separate from the animal world in that regard, and therefore it is a set of ethics that we need to practice. In some sense, the animal world also has its own set of ethics, but in a more conscious sense, humans have ethics. The other thing is when the tiger kills the deer to eat, the tiger does not know about violence and things like that. The tiger does not have a moral spectrum to understand that killing is violence, because in their world, killing and violence, which are actually on the moral spectrum, do not exist because they are not cognate beings. So we separated from the animal species through our ability to cognate. So all the affinities we continue to have, which have given us our sensories, and all the properties from which we have diverged, we have separated from animals, is where we have built a conscience through which we are able to recognize right from wrong and good from bad, and it then imposes upon us to be more responsible than our earlier species, because now we know what it means to not do the right thing, to not do the good thing. And therefore, humans sitting on the top of the pyramid are actually, loaded with this added responsibility of being responsible living beings. Okay, so now I have pointed out a set of affinities, and I pointed out a set of differences. In the set of affinities, scientists are constantly telling us that it is good to actually look at where you have similarities with the animal world, if at least to make things more efficient for us. Why reinvent the wheel? Why should you figure out everything for yourself? If it's already in your DNA and it's a good thing, go ahead and practice, such as biomimicry. So therefore, which I will talk about in my strategies, but biomimicry, for example, is it gives us a lot of understanding about how the living world actually organizes itself efficiently, and therefore why not we also use some of those principles. Now, not only that, we separated, not only, so when you recognize a set of affinities with the biosphere and a set of differences with the biosphere, it means that you are prepared to use the affinities as part of your principles of sustainability. But when you do not recognize that and you consider the entire biosphere to be non sentient, that means animals, of course, have life, but if a particular society or culture does not recognize the plants, etc., to have life giving properties or to be living beings, then their uh, and if those are their principles, then their strategies for sustainability will also be vastly different from those that believe that these forms of nature have life. So now what happens when you are driven, when your principles are technology centric and driven by man's interest over nature, which is the anthropocentric approach, versus when your principles are driven by nature and man working in tandem, which is the life centric approach, which I spoke about under life centric approach. But as windows of opportunity into sustainability, what does this then end up showing? Under the anthropocentric model, you have we know that we have now gone past needs into wants and desires, where demand always exceeds supply because wants, and there's no end to wants and desire, and technology has made it evident that it can keep on building things that will make those things look desirable and aspirational for the human. So we cater to this model by incessantly manufacturing goods and services. A prime example of that is Apple launching new models of versions of its phone every year, expensive models, each of which has a new feature, and then you feel as if the old one is so obsolete that it's going to make your life either look bad, feel bad. You have all these perceptible things in your head, or will look bad in your peer group because you're not fashionable enough, etc. And therefore you willy nilly discard that, go buy the new one. That is also the case with many other products. Basically, a new form of product every other day is how civilization is shaped, and from where their sense of satisfaction emerges. Now, if you live in a culture where you are limited to keep you are required to keep your idea of what you what you need to sustain life to what you need, then you know that you will somehow have to match demand with supply, and tap into resources only to the extent of the limitedness of the supply, and then match demand according to that. The second property of the anthropocentric versus life-centric windows of opportunities, where of course we know that the anthropocentric world believes that there is an infinite supply of materials, and where it is difficult to get it, it can be assisted by technology to dig deeper and deeper into the earth, or wider and wider, to extract those materials, and therefore these become extractive economies. Whereas if you consider that the planet is finite, then you will take all those natural resource services, brand them, label them as sanctified, and create them as special protection through regeneration, so that once the area the area receives a sanctified status, you allow it to remain bare through the monsoon months, or through whichever months that is required for a particular geographical condition, and you give it time to regenerate. And therefore, you come up with extractive versus regenerative economies. The next part is where, following this, is that in the anthropocentric model, under the anthropocentric model, you are highly contingent and functional. That means short term, need to do basis. It's like अभी जो चाहिए अभी करेंगे, बाद में की बात बाद में सोचेंगे. So it's very contingent, like you have contingent funds are for managing a situation. So everything we do here under this model is to simply manage the situation. I want I want the next version of iPhone. I will somehow manage the situation, and I'll make the money available, but I will not think in terms of what I could have done with that money if I simply gave up the idea of using something that I desire and diverted that into need. That means if my needs are met, then I can actually divert the funds to others' needs. And which sounds like a highly romantic proposition now. Like, it's like, who does that? Why should we do that for anybody? So the individual centric cultures, it is highly unlikely that you will do things like that. And therefore, there is also the idea of philanthropy. Philanthropy in the West is not interconnected with your life. Philanthropy is what billionaires or millionaires do. Whereas in the culturally mediated societies, for example, like I mentioned earlier, Ramzan, you have to put aside a certain amount as charity. And likewise, there are other festivals from Jain, Buddhist, and Hindu faiths, where you've set aside, what you have for others, to benefit others, the less fortunate. So, under the anthropocentric model, the contingent functional level solutions talk a lot about tightening their belts and recycling. So their solution out is to simply tighten their belt and recycle. And they've come up with something called life cycle assessment, which is what I'll talk under the industrial ecology, which is where you start with the product and see where it goes, and wherever it ends, then you decide whether it should recycle, reuse. The three R's. So they're very tight on these kind of models, and and just to say that many of the material that they say can be recycled can actually not, because they go into the earth and they stay there for 400, 500, 600, 1000 years. So there is no value to that. So there is a difference. Increasingly people are understanding that there's a difference between recycling and composting. Recycling will remain in embedded inside the earth, whereas composting will become part of the earth. On the other hand, in the life-centric models, you talk about long-term solutions where you create sanctified areas, and you also go into behavioral changes, so that your behavior itself changes with a set of values that you are forced to adhere to. You're taught to adhere to those values, and sometimes we do this through values that convert into rituals. So, for example, the Chaturmas that starts from now, actually Ashar, middle of the month. The month of Ashar started for 4 months. The Jain community and many other communities, Hindu community, they will go into some form of fasting or the other, because this is a particularly tender time for our ecology. When the rains come, new growth happens, and fish starts spawning eggs. So if you keep on eating this on a regular basis, they will not have the gestation period required for these to mature and become full forms, which can then be consumed. Therefore, these 4 months are delicate and set aside, and you actually practice a form of abstinence and fasting, through which you give up eating some things, and sometimes you don't even eat. You just try and minimize your consumption through liquid intake and things like that, which also is good for your body, which I will show you as a separate system. Whereas in the other system, there is no such concept of fasting or abstinence. You basically first destroy and then you try to fix. And of course, lastly, the anthropocentric model works to materiality, which means that you turn. They have a lot of solutions: turn plastics into compost, turn polluted water into treated water. They even turn the seawater into drinking water, and that consumes a huge amount of energy. But really, as a tribute to technology, you have to you have to admire how far ahead they are of us in using technology to convert things from one to another, and and continue to use them as resources. So the idea of new materiality versus regeneration will not enter their system. Okay, now we quickly go into the next phase where this is a very important part, which I would have loved elaborating a little bit more, but I have compressed it, which is that we look at sustainability as a part of a living world. Okay. Now, if you think that this is only about faith, Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, it's not that. It is actually driven by science, as I've mentioned, that our connection to our earlier species, which has left certain forms of DNA in our species, which forces us to behave in certain ways, which are probably actually recognizing that kind of behavior is probably good for sustainability, is something that has been recognized by science. And scientists from the evolutionary biology community, from the chemistry community, and from the information sciences community, that computational community, have been trying to understand how humans' basic movements, impulses, behavior that is not value-laden behavior, but just the movements, sensory-laden behavior, movement. Why do we move in certain ways? Our kinetics. Why do we move in certain ways? Why don't we move in certain ways? How do we use our sensories, etc., etc. And should we actually try to uh, uh, obliterate, that is flatten out our sensory because we think it is primitive, or should we actually allow our sensories uh, to be used, because sensories were developed as a means of protection and as a means of preserving certain things, etc. And today, in the context of sustainability, all the more scientists feel that we should not actually forget our sensories. We should actually try to understand. um, so uh, but before we come to sensories, they have realized that we have our sensories today because of the way we were, in the way we moved and behaved when we were unicellular and multicellular species. Before unicellular and multicellular species developed the vertebrae, that is backbone, and then became, fish, etc., and then became bigger fish, and then became mammals. Now, one of the persons who was able to recognize this affinity between our very, very earliest species and the way they process information and the way humans continue to process information is a person from biological sciences who then entered computational sciences, a person called Douglas Robertson, who had said that all life forms must process information in some fashion or the other, whereas information processing has always been associated with humans using computers to information process. Very, very quickly, just to say that we move from being unicellular to which is protozoas, which is amoebas, etc. And the way they processed information was to collect, process, and respond to their immediate environment. No more than that. Whatever the immediate environment, if it was hot, it was hot, they would respond to hot, cold, respond to cold, and that's it. That was the end of the information processing. Then, as we became multicellular, that is metazoa, we metazoans learned to first collect and interpret specific information from the sensory apparatus. That means through their eyes, ears, paws, noses, namely through seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, and so on. And that is where, from the leap from unicellular to multicellular, where the multicellular metazoa organism learned to interpret information, is when we first acquired our sensories. Then, very quickly moving on from there, um, the sensory apparatus to communicate was first through muscle tissues, and animals, by that time they became mammals, learned to pounce, flee, wing, growl, sniff. We do all of this actually. And then, in other words, metazoans had developed levels of nervous system and brains which the unicellular world did not have, and they learn to respond to the physical and chemical state of the environment, so that in the unicellular form, if it was cold, you just remained in cold. If it was warm, you remained in warm. But as a metazoan, that is multicellular, you will actually fight the cold to build a protective coating around you through your, you will fight the cold through your sensories. And then, of course, when multicellular metazoans became Homo sapiens, they actually carried the same facility forward to build a sense of, to build their sensories, to strengthen their sensories, so that. And what was the difference between metazoans and humans? The difference was now that they were able to not only process information and protect themselves, they were also able to produce the information and store and distribute information. That is the difference between metazoans and humans. And in other words, they were able to handle information. That means once you're able to handle information, you can actually manipulate information. And that's why we know that the human's ability for, and of course, all information is processed through the sensory world. And that's how we owe a deep debt of gratitude to our biosphere for giving us this wonderful facility of sensories. Now, it has become abundantly clear now that the use of sensory keeps us grounded, and grounded to reality, and has become a potent tool with which to manage uncertainties, manage our everyday lives, and so on. And this is increasingly being recognized by the computing world, because they feel that somehow we need to preserve our sensories, to we need to preserve our sensories to make our lives richer, not blunt our sensories, but actually heighten our sensories. Whereas the earlier computing world was hell bent on blunting our sensories, because they said that the computer will speak for you. Now they started finding proxies of sensories and to put into the computer, and which they have of course done through various technologies like vision technologies, etc. We'll come to that. So the one of the first scientists technologists to recognize the agency of sensory through computing, in the way that if you're going to live in a world of computing, how can we actually transfer human sensories so that humans can actually continue to use extend the use of sensory through computing. The one of the first persons to recognize that was Ray Kurzweil through his book Age of Intelligent Machines, which he had published way back in 1980. Kurzweil now works for Google. And he says that virtual reality will become all but indistinguishable from reality in the next 15 years. So that through the virtual 3D model, the effort for the technology world is to embed the human sensories, see, touch, smell, and hear, in such a way that you will no longer be able to distinguish machine sensory from human sensory, because they will become so lifelike. And now, why is there such a lot of effort to try and emulate, that is, mimic human sensories into the computer, where earlier on it was the other way around? It was like telling us that we need to it was telling us that we need to actually mimic the computer. But now it is the other way around. It is trying to make the computer mimic the human sensories. Now let's try to understand the agency of sensory. We all know this, but I'm just trying to make you more conscious, so that you can actually make it part of your sustainability strategies. The first sensory, of course, is sound, which is basically our auditory responses, and it is a way to understand if there is some danger lurking around the corner, because from very early times humans made loud drumbeat sounds, thumping sounds with their feet. I know that on IIT campus, which has a lot of jungles, etc. In the rainy season, they say when you're walking on the road, thump. You walk with loud footsteps, and most people don't know about it. But people who live in a world coexisting with reptiles, snakes, etc., who actually do no harm to humans, because the humans know how to avoid them, how to live with them, and stay away from them. They do things like stamp their feet and all that. We also know that you light a fire and you sit around in villages, you play your drums by night, and you keep danger at bay. That means animals that should not be actually entering your vicinity or habitat will stay away. And so also danger represented by humans, dacoits, etc., who will not come because they know you're in a social group around a fire, and they will be overpowered. Sound is also what actually saved a lot of Adivasis and animals from the 2004 tsunamis. Now, when that happened, in Andamans, for example, the Andaman Islands, where you have the naval base, and a lot of tourists go there was a big worry after the tsunamis. On the day the tsunamis happened, the first worry amongst administrators in mainland India was that we would have lost all our Adivasis and animals. You have a lot of elephants and such animals there. When the tsunami subsided after a few days, they discovered to their utter surprise that all Adivasis, all elephants, they were all alive and well, and those who perished were actually people, tourists, and others who were on the beach. Now, how did the Adivasis and animals survive the tsunami in a small island where the tsunami simply came and swept across the island? So, how did these entities survive? The way they did was, because they still live in a highly sensory ridden world, they could actually hear the tsunami from thousands of miles away. Animals can hear, Adivasis can hear, because they still live in a world which is very primal. And because they heard, they climbed to higher grounds, elephants and Adivasis and other animals, and their lives were saved. Whereas human beings like us, who live in very cognitive worlds supported by technologies, our sensories are not so strong anymore. We also need to understand that outside of that, in the living human world, everyday human world, the sound has very, very, beautiful transferences. For example, makers of violins have always wanted to mimic the human sound. So the early makers of violin in Italy, Andrea Amati in the 15th century, actually tried to imitate the male voice through bass, through this deep bass sounding sound on its violin, whereas the Stradivarius violin tries to imitate the female voice. We also know that researchers have found out, marine researchers have found out that sharks can actually respond to music if it is given food. So you can actually map, food eating impulse with music. So if you want sharks to move away, then you actually attract them with music to another part of the ocean. We also know that fish, aquatic animals, move through sound to find their prey. And because we come from the water world, we once originated in water, this has very deep implications for us. We also know that every religion, every faith has some form of sound on the or the other. So, for example, you have bells in Hindu and Christian temples. You have the azan through which the Muslim clergy announces prayer time. You have the conch shells and the didgeridoos, conch shells in Bengal and elsewhere, didgeridoos in Africa. You have the cymbals, the kirtan ke samay jo bajate hai. You have that. You have chanting, which is Om, and through Om, actually, you generate a certain kind of chemical which actually protects you, which they found through COVID time. There's a particular chemistry that it generates that is actually part of the remdesivir and these medications. So it's not just a fancy chanting of mantras, it is actually life giving. We also know, very interesting example I'd like to give you, which is that in the Black Sea region of Turkey, there is a bird language, which is a highly developed system of whistling that is still used by thousands of people, mostly in the Kanachi district of southern Turkey, to communicate across very long distances in the mountain terrain. Uh, and a couple of 3 years ago, UNESCO actually put this on the list of intangible cultural heritage in need of urgent safeguarding. So that's a really beautiful example of the agency of sound. We know that in Sweden and Norway, there's a music form called kulning, even today, which is often used mostly by women to call home cows and goats grazing on high mountain pastures. It is also possible that the sound also serves to scare away predators like mountain lions, etc. Then, this is so interesting. In India, in the state of Meghalaya, northeastern state of Meghalaya, there is a singing village. This is, of course, in Meghalaya, where curious whistles and chirrups echo through the jungle around a place called Kongthom, a remote village, where these sounds are like bird songs. You would think that these are birds chirping, but actually, these are people calling out to each other in music. And why are they calling out? Because these are names. So mothers compose a special melody for each child, which becomes a child's name. So when you're calling the child, you actually hum the melody. So these are all part of our living traditions. We quickly come to the next sensory, which is the sensory of taste, which is called cunilingual responses, and can be seen in the one of the things the earliest protocols was so what do we do when we have a drink? We toast and we clink glasses, right? Now that is a way we say this is to toast, because when you pour each other a drink or you meet at a bar and you take your beer glasses and you click, it's a very friendly gesture. You are wishing each other well. But the way it started was when warring chieftains, different tribes with their heads would at war would decide no more war, let's meet and let's try and prepare grounds for peace. And they would meet, let's say one chieftain meets in the village of the other chieftain because he's invited and he comes with his people. Now this would become an occasion for the host to poison the chieftain who's been invited. There is no guarantee, right? So the way to find out would be, and they used to have very large glasses from which they drank. So they would clink their glasses so that part of the liquid from one glass would actually spill over to the other glass. And so the liquid from the invited chieftain's glass would would spill into the host glass. And if this liquid was brew was poisoned, it would also poison the host. And therefore, the host knew that it could not employ such techniques. So, toasting was actually a way to protect ourselves. So that's about taste. We also know that the doctor, it's a protective measure. The doctor asks you to stick out your tongue. If it's coated, then you know you have fever. If you have acidic feeling, then you know that your digestive system requires repairing and so on. And it is also connected to the way your heart is. There are cardiac physicians who know how to, understand that through by just looking at your tongue. We come to smell, which is olfactory responses, where smell is what animals release as bad odor when they want to repel enemies. Now, humans, for example, sniff their ways out of dangerous situations, and even today, the slightest smell of smoke alerts us to danger, right? They also say that when the Bhopal gas tragedy happened in 1984 December, if it had not happened at night, uh, you know, it was a cold winter's night. In those days, it used to be even more cold. It was a cold winter's night when Union Carbide released, perhaps by mistake, but it released a large amount of uh, a very, very poisonous gas, which they're not supposed to. And people asleep in their houses did not smell. And many of them died, many of them got maimed for life. But if they had smelled, they would have run. So, unfortunately, that was not to happen. They say that if it was a daytime leakage, the number of victims would have been a whole lot less, which is very unfortunate that the release happened at night. Smell, they found in animal kingdom that elephants can smell water from miles, from up to 3 miles away. And tigers, and big prey, of course, can smell their prey. But humans, for example, can also smell. For example, a newborn baby smells the mother. And so when the mother is not in the room, the mother is gone to get the baby a feed, or the mother is gone to take a bath, the baby knows that the mother is not in the room, and it starts crying, and no amount of hugging and cajoling the baby will make the baby stop, because it wants the mother. And you wonder, why is the baby crying, and how does it know that the mother is not in the room? And especially breastfed babies, if they lose their mother soon after, it is almost impossible to contain them and get them to breastfeed on any other person. And of course, there is this famous study called Study of Proxemics by Edward T. Hall, and I had mentioned Edward T. Hall and his Anthropology of Space under the Genesis of Social uh, Design, where Edward T. Hall says that once upon a time humans were like rats. Any human entering the room, if we were like rats that we were once upon a time, we would be able to smell. But that deep sense, acute sense of smell is now abated, because our current lifestyles do not require that level of smelling. And it is just as well, because you don't want to smell every human being who enters the room. So, just evolutionary, forces wise, some of these sensories get mediated. Uh, of course, there is touch. Touch is a very easy thing, because if somebody gives you a limp handshake, you know that the person is not very keen to be with you, or you give a bear hug, warm hug. That person is very eager to receive you, and so on. These are much easier. Tactile gestural responses are also very, very direct, and it has reached a fairly high level of attainment in the through proxying through the computing world. And of course, lastly, there is sight and visual response. There's not much to be said about it, because that's the most overused of sensory, and therefore I will save time by not talking too much about it. But spring is ushered in through the colors of Holi, and then that white attire is not used on brides in certain parts of the country, but in other parts of the country like Kerala and Northeast, uh, and in many other parts of the world, white is used because it's a sign of purity. Whereas in Gujarat and Maharashtra, it is green and yellow because it's a sign of fertility. And in Bengal, in the north, in Orissa, it is red because it is vibrancy and, fire. And we also know now that thanks to technologies like vision technology, speech and image recognition technologies, gesture-driven technologies that are being embedded into VR, AR, etc., new frontiers of these new frontiers of research are trying to embed human sensories into computing. So we therefore know how important that part of the world is. So now we I completed very fast, right? I rushed so much that I completed ahead of time. So now I can spend time on the examples that I wanted to show you. Let me just check if I have completed everything. Yes, I have. Okay. Now let me take you through a series of examples uh, which are culturally mediated and are in response to sustainability. These are culturally mediated examples that have come through centuries of response into sustaining our environment through, through efficient and economic living. First of all, is the way we look at nature. We call them elements of nature. We look at the entire macrocosm, macroscopic picture of nature is in five elements: the earth, which gives us stability on the ground; water, followed by fire, followed by wind, followed by sky as you move upwards. And of course, these are represented culturally uh, by these forms. What earth, because it's stable, it's square; water is crescent because it forms ripples and waves; fire is triangle because of its ferocity and its edge; wind because it's encompassing, all encompassing; it is circular and it is round; and dots are the sky, because that's how you look at the sky. The cosmic sky appears as a series of dots at night. Uh, there is a very interesting interpretation of the macrocosm view of five elements of nature become a microcosm view in our culture, and that is how Ayurveda took shape, which is that the human body, the five elements of nature, can be mapped onto the human body, where starting from the bottom, you have the uh, 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 starting from the bottom, you have the Kundalini, the consolidated position, above which you have all the forces of expellation, which is kidney, etc., through which all the liquids and solids that need to be expelled from the body are moved. So the consolidation Kundalini represents earth. The expellation, because it's in the form of liquid, is actually water. Then there's the digestive tract just above that, which is the gastric tract, which is fire. And if you don't keep it under track, then through acidity, etc., you can feel the burn. Then comes the breathing part, which is the cardiac and pulmonary systems, which is the heart and lung system through which you breathe. Both have to work, function properly, and we know that so well today because of COVID. And lastly, there is the thinking, which is before you, which is the brain, which is actually part of the cosmic space, equivalent of the cosmic space area. Now let's move on to application of these. This is, of course, the elements of the microcosm of the elements of nature. We move on to the next slide, which is where we had this international conference called In a Planet of Our Own, where we had speakers, keynote speakers, and participants from all six continents. And they were astounded to see the way we actually organize our understanding of nature around these five elements of nature principle. So we converted, the symbols that I just showed you, earth for square, water for crescent, etc., we converted them into more friendly images: leaf for earth, water with lotus for water, and so on. Kites in the sky, and then lamps in the night sky. And this became our logo for the conference and for our exhibition as well. You can see some of the forms that we have generated here, where we for earth we had squares in yellow ochre, for water we had arcs in blue, then for fire we had triangles which was in red, for wind, we had circles and semicircles in light gray and blue, and for space, we had dots in a dark background. So these became our design elements. We then move on into a very interesting cultural element. This is also elements of nature represented by tree, and then water, starfish for water, and then you have wind and as turbulence, and so on. These are examples from other cultures. As we move on, uh, we took a very, very important and interesting cultural tool called the Ganjifa cards, which were actually cards that had originated in Persia and had migrated to India through those who had fled Persia, that is Parsis, and after the Ganjifa cards, and that was in the 11th, 12th, or 13th century, but after Ganjifa cards came to India, they stopped existing not only in Persia, but not even in the Arabic world or anywhere in the world. The only place today you find Ganjifa cards are in India. Ganjifa is where Ganjifa is actually Ganj means treasure in Persian, and Chi Pai, which is playing cards in Chinese, because there are scholars from Arabic scholars from the 18th century who used to find Arabic merchants and Chinese merchants in Bombay playing with Ganjifa cards. Now, what we did was we through a student project from that time, which
आटा है मम्मी
somewhere
आटा
around
है
2007 or 8, the student had done some very good work on Ganjifa cards. She's from Konkan, and the three parts of the country where you have Ganjifa cards in full swing use is Konkan. Uh, Manish, can you just mute the person who's talking? Ankit and Manish, can you please mute them? Right. So, Ganjifa, these are Ganjifa cards from West Bengal, from Vishnupur, which is where you make from red terracotta, from red soil, you make terracotta images. So they make Ganjifa cards. They also make it on terracotta. You have Ganjifa cards from Orissa. You have them from Konkan mostly. These are Ganjifa cards that were created by the student for a project which had various forms of animals, which we then used for our inner planet of our own. So, for example, fish, tiger, bird, etc., went on to represent different sections of our exhibition, and which were much appreciated actually by visitors who came from different parts of the world. And then what we did was we took the mudras from Bharatnatyam, the different mudras from Bharatnatyam that suggest water, connection with water, with earth, with fire, with wind, and with space, and turned them into these Ganjifa cards to represent, as derivative representations of the five elements of nature, which means that you're actually moving into complex zones of symbolism to create interest in design, because you don't just want it to be a direct translation all the time. You want it to be interpretive. Uh, when we did our In a Planet of Our Own, which was in 2009, because of its success, the international community wanted us to do it again. So when we did it again in 2015 as part of the Cumulus network, we took water as special learning. And a student of ours, an MD student of ours who had done his undergraduation in NID, Abhijit, he went ahead and created these Ganjifa cards. So we had five different aspects of water, namely pot from which you drink, lotus which floats in water, boat in which you go and fish or you travel from one place to another, fish which is an intrinsic organism from underwater, and of course our intersection with the humans intersection with water. Uh, and this was part of the exhibition in a planet of our own, where the five elements of nature were actually beautifully portrayed and became a great bit of learning for the international community. And in the bottom, you can see the Ganjifa cards. They were actually blown life sized. Here, we converted elements of nature into friendly forms of everyday artifact through design. That is how design is actually applied. So here you have, for example, fire, element of nature as fire, as triangular lamps hanging from a tree in front of IDC. They looked so beautiful that for years later, the BTech students and others continued to, imitate this. So now you have these lamps hanging from different hostels, etc., because they found it so inspiring. We did these firkis, which represented wind, such a beautiful way to represent wind. And I know that one of our keynote speakers for designing for children, which happened a few months later, 2 months later, found these firkis so fascinating. He was this technologist who had featured on Time Man of the Year, Chris Crawford of gaming. He wanted some of these, so we had to get some of these from the market and give them to him. And he went away. He took them with him to California. Something that we take for granted was fascinating for him. We used inverted umbrellas in our courtyard full of trees as a symbol of water getting stored in inverted umbrella. And you know that umbrella is something that protects you from rain. We also used uh, these are birds to show wind and sky. And in the distance, if you can see, there is, let me just go back to the slide before this. Can you see on the right side, there are, on the right side, there's a set of windows. Actually, the IDC is famous for these windows, red squares. And you look out, it's a wall, which is a glass wall full of these squares, which was actually a design inspired by Bauhaus. And you look out into the sky because it's on the second floor, third story. And on these windows, we created different forms of life which you see in the sky, which is birds, stars, etc. So when you looked out of these, which is charokas, you saw life in sky, you saw the galaxy, you saw different things at night. And this remained in IDC for many years after that because it looks so beautiful. These were five elements of design, elements of nature converted to design. This was a tree of life, where we, also in the courtyard. And tree of life is this rich symbol of how a tree actually encompasses different life forms, nurtures life forms, and in turn nurtures humans. So just the five elements of nature. These were flags that we had put up. The flags would flutter, and the participants would be curious to see which is for water, which is for fire, because they would try to decrypt the symbol and say, okay, I get it. This is for water, this is for fire, this is for sky, because it is so alien to their cultures. I now come to the next set of installation that we had done, which became a very big hit because it was invited to be featured at the Kalagor Arts Festival, which is one of the largest arts festival in the world today, and it got featured there twice actually. This was actually inspired by, in Las Vegas, you have these life-size statues, cardboard cutouts of bride and groom. Okay, so you go stand behind these and you look like a bride and groom. Okay, so this was this playful popular culture expression of the Dashavatar. Now we know that we came from fish, and so we did a fish which was on the ground, and you had to crouch on the ground and put your face through the fish, and you would look like a fish, but you would have to be on the ground. The person who's clicking is clicking the face of the person who is pretending to be a fish. Uh, hmm? The earlier one was fish. This is the boar. We know that following the fish was the boar, and then following the fish was turtle, and following the turtle was boar, and following that was various forms of humans. This is where a child is peeping out from one of those cutouts. This, I think, was a fish cutout. I'll show you some more. So this was a very friendly way of making audience understand origin of species in the way actually Charles Darwin had laid out. Charles Darwin, not aware of the fact that millions of years ago there's a culture in India which had already foreseen the evolution of species coming from water into amphibian, that is something like turtle which occupies both land and water, into into animals on land and into humans, because the rest of the world, save for a few cultures like ours, believed in the Genesis theory, which means that man was created overnight by God, and he was put on a boat and things. Whereas we are one of the only cultures that actually got it right, in biological science terms. So we call it the Dashavatar, of course. Um, so now let me show you the avatars one by one. And of course, avatar word itself has been taken by the computing world as avatar. So let's go to the next one. Here is which one is this? This is the tortoise. Yeah, this is the tortoise. So we saw the Matsya earlier on. This is the Kurma, which is the tortoise. So here you come, the height is a little bit more. Then we have the boar, the avatar of the boar, and then from there we come to uh, the Narasimha, avatar of Narasimha, which is half man, half lion, and which shows the slow evolution of animals into humans. And then, actually, in our culture, we represent it as a Narasimha, which is half man, half lion, but in in reality is actually the ape. And then we have the dwarf, which is the very early human. Uh, Before the human became a full-fledged bipedal human. So the dwarf was the early human. And then we have the Parshuram, which is a more evolved form of human. And after which we have Rama, and followed by Rama's avatar, followed by uh, Krishna. And then what we did was to, and then of course you have Balaram avatar. And after that, what we did was to put the anthropocentric superhuman man, because that is what the computer is trying to do. Move into singularity and make the computer uh, so powerful that it makes the human also very powerful. And when we put out this these when the second time round we put them out in the at the Kalagor Arts Festival, the Shiv Sena came and protested, saying that you cannot add this to the Shavatar. And we tried explaining to them that this is popular culture and this is an extension of, this is an interpretation of our present day interpretation of Dashavatar. And of course, they threatened to destroy, so we had to remove. And the organizers were really disappointed that the Dashavatar could not be presented, because that used to have the most number of people come and watch. And because, so the first time they made space for this was in the Horniman Gardens, Horniman Circle Gardens, a beautiful garden. And there were so many people that for the next year, they gave us this huge place in the middle of Kalaghora, saying this is where Dashavatar installation is going to be kept. And the reason why also it's so popular is because people can interpret and engage and use it as an immersive experience. See, I put my face to the fish and I become fish, and somebody clicks a picture and you put it out on Facebook and like, look, I'm in fish form. And it's very exciting. It found instant rapport. uh, we also had this beautiful, scroll in the making live by famous calligrapher Achut Pallav, who not a lot of people know today that he was the person behind reviving a lost type called Modi script, a lost script called Modi script, MODI, in Maharashtra. So Achutji, we invited Achutji, and notice that he's wearing a blue kurta because he is showing the origin of Earth. And he starts with the Bindu, which is the origin, which is what Hakusha showed us as well. When I showed you Hakusha's, proposition of images starting with Bindu and then several Bindus, all forming different forms of life. So then Bindu expands to go into the next stage of evolution. And this huge scroll we had placed in the IDC quad, and we had all these international participants watching it from first, second, and third floor, crowding around and being able to see this because you could get an overview. And finally, when you see, and of course, he writes in Devanagari through Devanagari calligraphy how life form evolved until you had this calligraphy script, and it took him several hours to do this until he reached the final. And of course, he brings in nature because initially there was no nature. So then at some point in time, the green life came, and so he used Devanagari script to express that. And then he moves on, and you can see the final scroll, beautifully done live by Achyut Pallav on the ground, watched by everybody for hours together. And this is the strength of our culture, where the entire thing is a story of sustainability, starting with the elements of nature, and then through calligraphy and typography, we are able to express some of the principles of sustainability, so that once a child or those in school are made to understand what it is, it remains in their, it becomes part of their memory and becomes part of the memory of an entire tribe. I will end with a beautiful project from which was inspired by the tsunami in Japan. And uh, if you remember, there was in 2011, uh, there was a page that I've written. Just give me a minute. Yeah. In 2011, there was an earthquake in Japan. And Japan, of course, is known for its earthquake. But, the last very big earthquake had happened in 1923, which had also caused, that was in Tokyo, it had caused this massive fire as well. And then after that, this 2011 earthquake was so strong and powerful. It was 11 on the Richter scale that had triggered a tsunami. So the tsunami of 2004 was also triggered by a very powerful earthquake in Indonesia, which then swept up as this huge wave of tsunami starting from Indonesia into India, Sri Lanka, into the east coast of Africa and Oman. Likewise, that was in 2004. Likewise, in Japan, the tsunami happened, the earthquake happened, followed by this huge tsunami. So the earthquake was a disaster, of course, but it triggered two related catastrophes. One was the tsunami because of the earthquake, and the second catastrophe connected to this was the fact that the tsunami was now going to sweep across the Fukushima nuclear reactor, which was on the coast and water would, and before they could actually switch off the nuclear plant, the tsunami had already happened overnight. And through the waters of tsunami, the radiation could spread far inland, which is what actually happened. And it caused widespread devastation. Now we know that Japan is a prosperous country. So there was a large scale human devastation. There was large scale devastation. But the help that Japan needed from the international community was not the money. What it needed was a show of emotional support, show of social support. And since the social medias had just come into being, come into some sort of maturity at that time, Facebook, YouTube, etc., were then flooded with expression of sympathy and empathy for the Japanese, for those who suffered the tsunami. And some of the sites that had come up that had become very popular, one of them was called the gaijinpod.com, and the other one was the J list. And it was quite unprecedented until then for empathy for help during a natural calamity like this to not be sought as funds and money, but as show of empathy. So the way this was also responded to, the different projects worldwide that expressed emotions through visual support, and they used the communities from around the world familiar with Japan or trying to familiarize themselves with Japan, use the cultural motives of what is called Hinomaru, which is the red sun. We know that the red sun is the Japanese flag. Geishas, because we know about geishas from Spielberg's film. Then we know the anime characters because Japan is so famous for its animation films. And then, of course, there was this famous Poster for Tomorrow project by Hervé Matin, through which became a platform for creating different kinds of posters in different parts of the world. One set was created by a Lebanese design educator called Antoine Abiad, who has been part of our school, who has been part of our typography day. And the last typography day we did, which was in 2020 in Jordan, Amman, Jordan, just around the time that COVID had set in, was actually at the behest of Antoine, who's from Lebanon, and it was supposed to have been held in Lebanon. But you know that Lebanon went through a whole, like a revolution where its entire economy sank and people protested, and therefore it was no longer possible to host typography day in Lebanon. And so we hosted it in uh, Antoine enabled the hosting of it along with Dr. Essam, the head of their main design school in Amman. And unfortunately, a few months ago, Dr. Essam passed away on account of COVID. I also wish to add in this context that it is the custom at Typography Day to announce the next Typography Day at an event. And so at Amman, we actually declared Banaras Hindu University to be the next host, where Professor Manish Arora was going to actually host it in at Banaras Hindu University with a team of his own. And because COVID has come, we have posted the Typography Day, Banaras Hindu University Typography Day, hopefully to 2022, so that people can actually be physically present. But anyway, going back to the power of typography and calligraphy, what happened here was that Antoine Abiad, who had done his PhD in Japan, had spent like 7 years in Japan, and he felt what he did was to galvanize students from Kenya, design students from Kenya, from South Africa, Johannesburg, from Taiwan, and from Lebanon. So we have students from these different continents who were driven by a common theme, uh, and which is outpouring of empathy and social messaging for those suffering from the devastation of the tsunami. That was the theme, and a way of reaching out to the Japanese. And they did it through typography and calligraphy, which is the use of the kanji script, which was actually a Chinese script that then got used by the Japanese when the Japanese imperial order had colonized China. So we here is the use of the kanji script to show different, to reach out and show different kinds of emotions. Now, the first one is where the idea of help is being shown, and you can see that this is actually the explanation for this poster is that it's a question mark partially formed by a rescue buoy. A rescue buoy is what you use in a ship. So these different elements, along with the basic kanji type, has been a particular kanji type has been used to uh, create a poster called Help, to empathize with the Japanese, to say that yes, we understand that you need help and we are here to reach out to you. The next one is about embrace. Embrace is a universal uh, 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 embrace is a universal feeling that every culture needs and helps to helps to provide to those who need uh, to be supported, and you do that through embrace. At home, the mother hugs her child. At in school, in social spaces, you embrace your you embrace your friends. In our culture, you will do pranam to your teacher, but in the West, they will embrace their teachers as well, uh, and so on. So this idea of embrace was written with the colors of South Africa, and the two kanji letters forming embrace are embracing each other. The third example here is good luck, where the two kanji characters with the meaning good luck are written vertically like a in Japanese it's called the maneki. In Japanese it's called maneki neko, which literally means beckoning cat and widely known as the lucky cat. Now you see in Africa it is lucky cat, and it was their way of reaching out to the Japanese by saying that we propose good luck. It's like touch wood when we intertwine our fingers. uh, then we have, of course, love, which is this completely international, universal form of emotion. The kanji of heart, which is a part of the another kanji script, is replaced by a heart, and you have this beautiful image, which is universally recognized as love. The next one is one of togetherness, where it is built in three stages. Beautiful. Uh, okay, let's skip to beautiful, which is actually the kanji script, where this ballet dancer has been superimposed, and you know. This is also from South Africa, and you know that South Africa has English culture, right? So part of that sensibility has come in here. Here is expression of faith. As you can see, symbols of faith. The cross is here. There are other symbols, and altogether, you see you have the kanji type, which expresses, which says the word faith, and you have the cross, and they have been put together beautifully to express faith. Then we have strength. This is beautiful because this has been conveyed by holding heavy stones in the form of Japan, the map of Japan, where when the tsunami happened. After that, the Japanese tried to put a heavy wall of stones along the coast, so that in future something like this happens, it'll at least have the tsunami will at least have some resistance. And so they used the same sustainability methodology to express it as a series of stones across the map of Japan. I would like to now show you strength. Another no, I would like to show you recovery and restore, which is shown here through the phoenix. The phoenix rises from the ashes, right? And so here the phoenix, which is like a bird, rises from the ashes. It's a legendary bird known for its ceaseless rebirth and therefore recovery. And you can see the ashes is all the different letter forms that represent what has got damaged. And overall, then you have the idea of rebirth, restore, and recovery. Uh, After recovery comes trust, which is trust here is transfigured by a child trustingly holding his parents' hands. You can see the parents' hands in the center, and the child holding the parents' hands, and both the letters over here, the kanji letters, one represents the child and one represents the parent. And a particular element of the letter taken out to form the hand holding the child. We then have pray prayers, which is like the prayer flags that are hung in front of monasteries, like prayer papers hung in Buddhist temples. So here these prayers are in the form of kanji type, and prayer, you'll see prayer flags in front of Buddhist monasteries in Darjeeling, Sikkim, etc., where they are always in different colors. So therefore, different colors were used. Lastly, I show you reconstruction, where the kanji letters have been superimposed on the buildings that then came up in came up in Fukushima later on. And you see, this project had been initiated soon after the tsunami, somewhere around 2012 or 2013, and continued into 2017. So by that time, some of these buildings had come up, and these letters, the kanji letters, which actually represent reconstruction, were superimposed on the image of the building to achieve what we have achieved here. So you can see that there are so many cultures around the world who express their sense of connect with nature, and their sense of understanding of sustainability through converting nature's forms into various symbols, forming a rich tapestry of symbolism, each culture having its own, in which they will use all the sensories that we use, and they will also use, and of course, that most of the sensory that is used is visual, and therefore visual communication, in which typography, colors, other forms, symbols, through symbolism, can all be collected to very quickly convey a certain idea, or the spirit of a certain idea behind a certain principle of sustainability. The reason why I have shown these examples is because these are living, working examples from these parts of the world, and the West is actually looking to understand how they can actually emulate this. And as I keep saying, as I never tire saying, that here is your opportunity to actually create these. I know that at the Banaras Hindu University, the art department, the design department, they are constantly doing work like this. All of North India has very strong representation of symbols. So also Eastern India, Southern India, Western India, whichever part of the country you come from, you can adapt to your local symbolism. Like we used Ganjifa from Maharashtra, which also happens to be there in Orissa and Bengal, probably because the Parsis had traveled from Western India to Bengal and Orissa, and what is today Jharkhand, because Jamshedpur had set up its steel mill, 1800, 1900. So perhaps that's the reason why the Ganjifa card traveled there, and today we have Ganjifa cards only in these parts of the country. So I end the session today hoping that we have some mental preparation for what strategies to adopt on the ground, which means that are we prepared to adopt long-term strategies that you can convey through storytelling and values, so as sustainability as connection with the biosphere becomes more potent, rather than sustainability's connection with material culture, as in the cup we drink from. So the cup, which is now in plastic, can become some form of foam that they say can be recycled, but we don't really know if it can be recycled. And the packaged economy continues to flourish, and the solution to that, this saying, is that we can use all that plastic to recycle and make something, and not understanding that even while recycling, you're actually consuming energy. So you don't make to recycle, you try not to make what is not needed. And I laid out the two alternate models of windows of opportunity, and it is now up to you to decide where you are located. And even if you are not located even if you are located in the West, today the West is looking to these culturally mediated spaces to understand how can they actually communicate messages of sustainability to their people, messages which are long term and not short term and contingent. So, Manish, I end my presentation here today.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. It is really, again, a very knowledgeable lecture from you. Hope participants will very much benefited. One question raised from the candidate participant. The question is, ma'am, I already WhatsApp you, but the question is that Vanifa cards are originated from Pattachitra. The question is there.
Okay, yeah, that's a nice question because Ganjifa cards, which first came from Persia, migrated to eastern India, and Patachitra is from Bengal and Orissa. So finally, it took on the form of Patachitra, which is actually a very good example to show because it shows human adaptiveness with with graphic with tools, with whatever tools you have around you through which you think you can actually communicate with people. The idea of Ganjifa cards is that it is very modular. On each Ganjifa card you can express one message, and then if you string the cards together, it will be a full integrated message. So the use of Ganjifa card with regard to sustainability messages is actually very, very promising. It can also be used as messaging for, we are planning to use it for disability kids. You can use it for situations where you may not be able to actually speak the whole truth. For example, in very patriarchal societies where you can't speak much in favor of women, you can use Ganjifa cards and you can use embedded symbology so that the woman understands what you're saying, and there is no overt proof for the men to get angry about it. So the Ganjifa card can be used in so many different ways, and also as a as a platform for storytelling, which is how Patachitra is today being used. That is what Patachitra is. You tell a story through pictures. And of course, you can decide how to use your story. So the story becomes a strategy, and the purpose can be sustainability, the purpose can be gender understanding, purpose can be messages for the disability world, and so on.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir, surely satisfied the participants. Again, thanking all of you, especially participant and ma'am also. Next lecture of the ma'am will be on Saturday at 4 p.m. about the strategy of sustainable social design matter. Thank you, ma'am, for your wonderful lecture.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, participants. And if you have any more questions, you can always send them to Manish Arora, and we will send you your assignments as well. Thank you, and good evening to everybody.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you. Bye. Bye, Manish.